The red dwarf star cast its crimson light across the void, illuminating the derelict husk of Sentinel 9 like a forgotten grave marker in the cosmic cemetery. Once a thriving outpost, the station had long ago been converted to a prison, a place to bury traitors and war criminals, where the Empire need never think of them again. Its hull, pockmarked with micrometeorite impacts and corroded by centuries of neglect, spoke of abandonment. Life support systems sputtered weakly, maintaining only the barest habitability in sections that still mattered to the Askera Empire. In this forgotten corner of the Outer Rim territories, time seemed to stand still. The Empire had expanded its reach across 30 star systems, but here, on the periphery, the grandeur of Askera felt distant, almost mythical. Adrian Corvian's salvage shuttle docked with a metallic groan against one of the station's few functioning airlocks. The engineers at the Imperial Core had sent him on what they called a routine maintenance inspection. But he knew better. Nobody sent salvage engineers to check functioning equipment. They sent them to determine what could be stripped and repurposed from dying installations. As the airlock cycled, Adrian checked the power levels on his atmospheric suit and adjusted the holster carrying Conscience, a rusted sword he'd inherited from his mentor, a veteran who had served in the pre-galactic era, before humanity had spread across the stars. The blade was practically an antique, a relic from when humanity still had illusions about honor in warfare. Atmosphere nominal but thin, he muttered to himself, reading the scanner on his wrist. Artificial gravity at 60%. Let's see what they want me to salvage from this floating coffin. Adrian had spent the last 15 years drifting from one rim outpost to another, stripping derelict ships and stations of anything valuable. The work was lonely but predictable, and it kept him away from the politics and machinations of the core worlds. Out here, survival was the only ideology that mattered. The corridors of Sentinel 9 were dimly lit by emergency lighting, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for him like spectral hands. His boots left footprints in the dust that had accumulated over decades of neglect. According to his datapad, he needed to assess the primary computer core and life support systems in the central hub, but a blinking anomaly on his scanner caught his attention. Down a maintenance shaft, deep in the lower levels, something was generating a faint energy signature. The reading was inconsistent with the station's known systems. Probably just a leaking power cell, he reasoned. But curiosity got the better of him. In the salvage business, unexpected findings often yielded the most valuable discoveries. The maintenance shaft led him deeper into the station than he had intended to go. The air grew colder, and the emergency lighting more sporadic. Finally, he reached a sealed metal door, ancient by the look of it, predating much of the station's other technology. What caught his eye wasn't the door itself, but the seal that secured it. A molecular bonding seal, technology typically reserved for high-security Imperial vaults. "What the hell is this doing out here?" he whispered, running his gloved hand over the seal's surface. The molecular bonds shimmered faintly under his touch, still active after what must have been centuries. His scanner indicated that beyond this door lay the source of the anomalous energy reading. Standard procedure would be to report this to Imperial authorities and wait for clearance. But something about this felt wrong. Why would they place such high security measures on a forgotten prison station? Adrian pulled out his plasma cutter, standard equipment for any salvage engineer, and attempted to breach the seal. The plasma beam struck the molecular bonds and dissipated harmlessly, not even leaving a mark. "Damn it," he muttered, trying various settings on the cutter. After several failed attempts, frustration got the better of him. In a moment of impulse, he drew Conscience from its sheath. The rusted blade had no practical use in his work, but he carried it as a reminder of the mentor who had taught him that even in the salvage business, there were lines one shouldn't cross. "Might as well try everything," he said with a wry smile, knowing full well the absurdity of attempting to cut through advanced technology with an ancient steel blade. He swung the sword at the seal, expecting it to bounce off harmlessly. Instead, to his astonishment, the blade sliced through the molecular bonds as if they were nothing more than spider silk. The seal disintegrated, and the ancient door slowly creaked open, releasing air that hadn't circulated in centuries. The room beyond was dark, save for a single, flickering red emergency light. As Adrian's eyes adjusted, he could make out what appeared to be a prison cell, far more secure than any he had passed on his way down. And there, in the corner, huddled against the wall, was a figure. At first, he thought it might be a corpse. No one could survive this long in isolation. But then the figure moved, turning slowly to face him. It was a woman with pale blue skin, her eyes sunken deep into her face from centuries of deprivation. Chains bound her to the wall, each link crafted from a material similar to the molecular seal he had just breached. 300 years, she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. 300 years I've waited for someone to find this place. The station's alarm system suddenly blared to life, red warning lights flashing through the corridors. On Adrian's datapad, an alert appeared. Security breach. Unit 9L activated. Containment compromised. The message was being transmitted directly to Imperial Command. In that moment, Adrian Corvian realized his routine salvage mission had just become something far more complicated. He had just freed a prisoner the Empire had gone to extraordinary lengths to keep contained, and now they both had to escape before Imperial forces arrived to investigate. "Who are you?" he asked, approaching cautiously. The woman struggled to her feet, the chains rattling with her movement. "Commander Lena Sarayer, Thunder Regiment," she replied, with a dignity that belied her ragged appearance. "Or at least, I was 3 centuries ago." Adrian stared in disbelief. No human could survive that long without advanced life support systems. Yet here she stood, weakened but alive. The blue tint of her skin marked her as one of the modified humans from the early days of interstellar colonization, adapted for high radiation environments. "These chains," she continued, lifting her arms with effort. "For 300 years, they've held me. The Empire's finest technology, designed to contain the most dangerous prisoners." Adrian looked down at the rusted sword in his hand, then back at her chains. "Let's test a theory," he said, approaching her cautiously. He raised the blade and brought it down on one of the links. Like the seal before it, the supposedly unbreakable chain parted cleanly under the edge of the ancient sword. One by one, Adrian cut through the chains that had bound Lena for centuries. With each severed link, her posture seemed to straighten, as though she were reclaiming something long lost. When the final chain fell away, she stood before him, emaciated but unbowed. There was a strength in her eyes that spoke of a will that had refused to break, even after centuries of solitude. "We need to move," Adrian said, glancing at his datapad. That alarm triggered an automated distress call. Imperial forces will be dispatched to investigate. "Then we haven't much time," Lena replied, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I know this station better than anyone. There are maintenance tunnels the Empire's architects never documented, passages I memorized during my first years of imprisonment." "Why were you imprisoned?" Adrian asked, as they moved toward the exit. Lena's expression darkened. "I refused an order. 300 years ago, during the Balerium Resistance, my regiment was ordered to execute civilian refugees. I declined and was charged with treason." She looked away, her jaw tightening. "My own sister signed the order for my eternal imprisonment." The mention of the Balerium Resistance stirred something in Adrian's memory. It was ancient history now, barely a footnote in Imperial education, a rebellious outpost that had been quelled, its population relocated. The official records made no mention of a massacre. As they navigated the dim corridors, Adrian noticed something on the walls of Lena's cell that he hadn't seen before. Thousands of names, meticulously carved into the metal. Some were accompanied by dates, others by short phrases or symbols. "What are these?" he asked, gesturing to the markings. "The dead," Lena replied simply. "Everyone who died in this station while I lived on. I carved their names so someone would remember them, so they wouldn't be erased from history as I nearly was." The realization of what she had endured, centuries of isolation, witnessing generation after generation of prisoners live and die while she remained, struck Adrian with unexpected force. This was no ordinary prisoner. The station's alarms continued to blare as they made their way through the maintenance tunnels Lena had described. Twice, they had to hide from ancient security drones still faithfully patrolling their programmed routes. Their sensors degraded, but still functional. "Your sword," Lena said as they paused to catch their breath in a junction between tunnels. "It's called Conscience, isn't it?" Adrian looked at her in surprise. "How did you know that?" "The hilt bears the mark of the humanist officers, a group that believed no order was legitimate if it violated human dignity. They passed down their blades from one generation to the next, each inheritor sworn to uphold the same principles." She studied his face. "You're not a soldier. How did you come to possess it?" "My mentor was a veteran of the pre-expansion wars," Adrian explained. "He taught me the salvage trade. Before he died, he gave me the sword and told me it had been in his family for generations. Said it would remind me that even in our line of work, there are lines we shouldn't cross." Lena nodded thoughtfully. These blades were forged with a purpose beyond cutting flesh. They were symbols of a covenant, a promise to cut through deception and stand for truth, no matter the cost. She gestured to the chains still dangling from her wrists. "That's why it could break my bonds when no modern tool could. The molecular structures respond to intent as much as physical force." Adrian wasn't sure he believed in mystical swords with special powers, but he couldn't deny what he had seen. Whatever the explanation, they needed to keep moving. They reached an auxiliary hangar bay, where Adrian had docked his salvage shuttle. As they prepared to board, the station trembled. Through the hangar's viewport, they could see an Imperial patrol cruiser approaching, the first responders to the station's distress call. "We need to leave now," Adrian said, powering up the shuttle's engines. "My ship isn't built for combat." Lena strapped herself into the co-pilot seat, her movements still stiff after centuries of limited mobility. "Set course for the photon drift," she instructed. "The asteroid field will mask our energy signature and make pursuit difficult." As the salvage shuttle detached from Centaur 9, the Imperial cruiser opened fire. Adrian weaved between the energy bolts, his years of navigating treacherous debris fields serving him well in evading enemy fire. Entering photon drift in 3, 2, 1. The shuttle lurched as they plunged into the dense field of asteroids and charged particles that had given the region its name. Behind them, the Imperial cruiser hesitated, then began a more cautious pursuit. "They won't risk their ship in here," Lena observed, watching the cruiser fall back. "But they'll report our trajectory and have patrols waiting when we emerge." Adrian glanced at her. "Then we don't emerge where they expect us to. I know these drifts better than any Imperial navigator. We'll lose them." As they navigated the treacherous field, Lena began to sketch a star map from memory on a scrap of paper Adrian had provided. 300 years had passed, but the stars themselves had changed little. "Acer Prime," she said, marking the capital world of the Empire. "That's where we need to go." Adrian stared at her in disbelief. "The Imperial capital? That's suicide. It's the most heavily defended system in the galaxy." "It's also where my sister rules," Lena replied, her voice hardening. "Empress Sina Sarayer, who sentenced me to eternal imprisonment, rather than face the truth of what happened at Balerium." "Your sister is the Empress?" Adrian was stunned, The current ruler of the Iskara Empire was indeed named Sina Sarayar, but she had been on the throne for only 30 years. That's not possible. The Empress is in her 6th decade, not her 4th century. Lena's laugh was bitter. The Sarayar lineage has ruled for 3 centuries, passing the name Sina from one generation to the next to maintain the illusion of continuity. But the first Empress Sina was my younger sister, who betrayed me to secure her position. The implications were staggering. If what Lena said was true, the entire imperial dynasty was founded on a lie, a betrayal that had been carefully hidden from history. Their conversation was interrupted by proximity alarms. An Imperial scout ship had entered the drift, tracking their ion trail despite the interference from the asteroid field. "They're persistent," Adrian muttered, adjusting their course to weave between 2 massive asteroids. Lena unbuckled her restraints. "Do you have weapons aboard?" "Just my tools and conscience," Adrian replied, focused on evading the scout ship. Lena nodded grimly. "Then tools will have to do." In the cargo hold, she quickly assessed Adrian's salvage equipment. With practiced efficiency, she assembled a makeshift armor from scrap metal and connected a power cell to a magnetic clamp, creating an improvised electromagnetic pulse emitter. When the scout ship finally caught up to them at the edge of the drift, it attached a docking clamp to force entry. As the airlock cycled, Lena positioned herself in the shadows, the rusted sword, Conscience, in her hand. The Imperial soldiers who boarded were unprepared for what awaited them. Lena moved with the precision of a trained commander, her centuries of imprisonment having done little to dull her combat instincts. She didn't kill. Instead, she disabled their weapons and communications with the EMP device she had crafted, then used Conscience to incapacitate them without inflicting lethal wounds. "This sword doesn't cut flesh," she explained to Adrian as they ejected the stunned soldiers in an escape pod. "Only deception." With the immediate threat neutralized, they set course for the nearest jump point that would take them closer to the core worlds and, eventually, to Acer Prime. During the journey, Lena shared more of her story. She had been a decorated commander, leading the Thunder Regiment in dozens of campaigns to expand the Empire's reach. But at Balerium, something changed. "It was a mining colony," she explained, her eyes distant with memory. "They had organized a labor strike, demanding better conditions and fair compensation for the minerals they extracted. The Empire labeled it a rebellion and sent us to quell the unrest." She described arriving to find not armed insurgents, but families, miners, teachers, children. The colony's leadership had already surrendered, agreeing to negotiations. "My orders were to make an example of them, to execute every 10th person publicly, then relocate the rest to labor camps." Her voice grew tight. "I refused. I told my superiors that no order was legitimate if it violated human dignity." For her defiance, she was arrested and brought before a military tribunal. Her sister, Sena, who would later adopt the royal name Sina, was a junior officer on the tribunal board. "She had a choice," Lena said, bitterness edging her words. "Stand with me or advance her career. She chose the latter, signing my sentence personally. Eternal imprisonment. My name erased from records. My existence denied." What Lena didn't know was what had happened after her imprisonment. How her sister had leveraged her loyalty to the Empire into a rapid ascension through the ranks, eventually orchestrating a coup that placed her on the Imperial throne. How she had established a dynasty that had ruled for 3 centuries, each successor taking the name Sina to maintain the illusion of continuity and divine right. As their ship approached the core systems, they had to navigate increasingly frequent Imperial patrols. Lena's knowledge of military protocols, though centuries old, proved invaluable in anticipating patrol patterns and security checkpoints. They stopped at a frontier trading post to acquire civilian clothes and identification. With her blue skin, Lena couldn't pass as a core world human, but she could blend in as one of the many modified humans who worked the lower levels of imperial cities. It was at this trading post that they first encountered evidence of Lena's impact on history, or rather, the effort to erase it. In a small museum dedicated to imperial military history, there was a display about the Thunder Regiment and its distinguished service. But the commander listed was not Lena Sarayer. It was a man named Vorden Kale, credited with resolving the Balerium uprising with minimal imperial casualties. "They didn't just imprison me," Lena whispered as they stood before the display. "They wrote me out of existence." Adrian placed a hand on her shoulder. "Not completely. You're still here." In the Trading Post's information hub, they gathered news about current imperial politics. The Empire was celebrating its Tricentennial Preservation Festival, a week-long event commemorating 3 centuries of unbroken peace and prosperity under the Sarayer dynasty. Empress Sina III would address the public in Acer Prime's central square in 3 days. "Perfect timing," Lena said, her eyes gleaming with purpose. 300 years to the day since my sister betrayed me and our people." Their journey to Acer Prime was fraught with close calls. Twice they had to abandon public transport when security scans were increased. They traveled the final leg aboard a cargo freighter, hiding among shipments of luxury goods bound for the capital's elite. Acer Prime was everything Sintal 9 was not: gleaming, vibrant, alive. Towering spires of crystal and alloy reached toward the perfectly regulated sky, where weather control systems ensured perpetual pleasant conditions for the imperial elite. The streets were clean, the citizens well-fed and fashionably dressed. It was the showcase of imperial prosperity, built on the resources extracted from worlds like Balerium. But beneath the surface glamour, Adrian and Lena discovered currents of discontent. In the lower levels, where service workers and laborers lived, there were whispers of inequality and resentment. Imperial propaganda was omnipresent, but so too were symbols of resistance, small, easily overlooked markings that signaled dissatisfaction with the status quo. In a lower-level tavern, they met Kira Thne, a young university student who worked nights as a server to pay for her education. When Lena cautiously revealed fragments of her true identity, Kira's eyes widened in recognition. "The Commander of Thunder," she whispered. "There are stories about you among the old veterans and history students. Unofficial histories, passed down despite the Empire's censorship." Kira introduced them to a network of dissidents, students, workers, veterans, who had been spreading alternative narratives about imperial history through underground channels. They called themselves the Truth Seekers, and they had been gathering evidence of imperial atrocities and cover-ups for decades. Among them was Ren Teton, an elderly veteran who claimed to have served in the Thunder Regiment centuries ago, though he had been just a junior officer then. When he saw Lena, he fell to his knees in shock and reverence. "Commander," he said, his voice trembling, "they told us you were executed for treason, that you had betrayed the regiment." "The opposite," Lena replied gently, helping him to his feet. "I refuse to let the regiment betray its honor." Through Kira's network, they learned more about the current Empress, Sina Thwund, the latest in the lineage that had begun with Lena's sister. Like her predecessors, she maintained the fiction that the imperial bloodline was blessed with extraordinary longevity, a divine right to rule. In reality, each Sina was trained from birth to mimic the mannerisms and speech patterns of her predecessor, creating the illusion of a single, immortal ruler. The Tricentennial Preservation Festival was to be the grandest celebration in imperial history. Security would be intense, but the event would also draw massive crowds, providing cover for their approach to the central square where the Empress would speak. Kira and her network provided them with festival worker credentials and uniforms. On the day of the Empress's address, they blended with the throngs of service staff preparing the square for the celebration. Conscience was hidden beneath Adrian's uniform, its presence a constant reminder of the truth they carried. The central square of Acer Prime was a marvel of imperial architecture, a vast open space surrounded by towering government buildings, with a central dais from which the Empress would address her subjects. Massive view screens displayed imperial propaganda, showcasing 3 centuries of progress and stability under Saraya rule. As noon approached, the square filled with citizens, the privileged elite nearest the dais, ordinary citizens in designated viewing areas, and a heavy presence of imperial guards maintaining order. The atmosphere was festive but controlled, with patriotic music playing through omnipresent speakers and vendors selling commemorative items. At precisely midday, Empress Sina III appeared on the dais to thunderous applause. She was regal in her imperial regalia, her bearing confident, her smile practiced and perfect. To the assembled crowd, she was the embodiment of imperial continuity and strength. "Citizens of the glorious Iskara Empire," she began, her amplified voice echoing across the square. "For 3 centuries, our dynasty has guided humanity to unprecedented prosperity and peace. Today, we celebrate not just our past achievements, but our unwavering loyalty to the principles that have sustained us." As the Empress continued her address, extolling the virtues of unconditional loyalty and selfless service to the greater good, Lena moved through the crowd, discarding her worker's uniform to reveal the tattered remains of her Thunder Regiment insignia that she had kept hidden in Sintal 9. Adrian followed close behind, his hand on the hilt of conscience. They reached the security cordon, separating the general crowd from the elite viewing area. Imperial guards began to take notice of Lena's unusual appearance and unauthorized movement. "Sena!" Lena called out, using the Empress's birth name rather than her imperial title. Her voice cut through the carefully orchestrated ambiance of the celebration. "Or is it Sena now? How many Senas have there been since you betrayed me, sister?" The square fell silent. The Empress faltered mid-sentence, her perfectly composed facade cracking for just an instant as she looked toward the source of the disruption. Lena continued, her voice carrying across the stunned crowd. 300 years ago, you sentenced me to eternal imprisonment for refusing to massacre innocent civilians. You built your empire on that betrayal, on the blood of Balerium's people and the erasure of truth." Imperial guards moved to intercept her, but something unexpected happened. From various points around the square, members of Kira's network began broadcasting a resistance anthem, a song that had been passed down in secret for generations, telling the story of the Commander of Thunder who chose conscience over obedience. The confusion created by the sudden, synchronized disruption gave Lena the opening she needed. She vaulted over the security barrier, Adrian at her side, conscience now drawn and gleaming despite its rust. "Citizens of Iskara!" Lena called out, addressing the crowd rather than the Empress. "You've been living under a lie for 3 centuries. Your prosperity is built on the suffering of Outer Rim worlds like Balerium. Your peace is maintained through suppression of truth and elimination of dissent." The Imperial Guards raised their weapons, but hesitated to fire into the increasingly restless crowd. From another section of the square, Ren Teton fired the first shot, not at the guards, but into the air. It was a signal, and suddenly, the civilians around him revealed themselves as veterans of various Imperial campaigns, many bearing the invisible scars of orders they had followed against their conscience. Chaos erupted. The carefully orchestrated celebration dissolved into a frenzy of movement. Imperial loyalists fled, while dissidents surged forward. Guards tried to maintain order, but found themselves facing not just Lena and Adrian, but hundreds of ordinary citizens inspired by the sudden revelation. On the dais, the Empress was quickly surrounded by her personal security detail, preparing for emergency evacuation. But before they could remove her, Lena cut through the guards with conscience. the ancient blade parting their energy shields as if they were nothing. "Look at me, Sena," Lena demanded, standing before her sister's descendant. "Look at what your betrayal created." The Empress stared at Lena with a mixture of shock and recognition. Not personal recognition, but the recognition of a nightmare from her dynastic education. A threat she had been warned might someday return. "You're a relic," the Empress hissed, regaining her composure. "A footnote in history that should have remained buried." "I am the truth you tried to erase," Lena replied. "And truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep you bury it." The standoff was interrupted by a plasma bolt that narrowly missed Lena's head. Imperial reinforcements had arrived, firing into the crowd to disperse the uprising. Citizens scattered, screaming in terror. In the chaos, Kira rushed to Lena's side, determined to protect the living legend she had only recently discovered. When another plasma bolt was fired at Lena, Kira threw herself into its path, taking the full impact in her chest. Lena caught the young woman as she fell, cradling her in the midst of the panicking crowd. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking. Kira's eyes were already dimming, but she managed to smile. "Because even if I don't live to see tomorrow, someone has to keep the flame of truth alive." Her hand clutched Lena's weakly. "Promise me you'll tell our story, all of it." As Kira's life ebbed away in her arms, something shifted in the crowd. The sight of a young woman dying to protect a stranger, a legend from the past, transformed the mood from panic to righteous anger. What had been a chaotic disruption became something more focused, more determined. Led by Rentitan and other veterans, the crowd surged toward the Imperial Guards, overwhelming them with sheer numbers and determination. The Empress was hustled away by her security detail, but the damage was done. The perfect image of Imperial continuity and benevolence had been shattered. Adrian pulled Lena away from the worst of the fighting, guiding her toward a maintenance access point that Kira had shown them as an emergency escape route. They descended into the industrial underbelly of Acer Prime, the sounds of conflict fading above them. In a forgotten maintenance hub deep beneath the gleaming city, Lena sat in silence, Kira's blood still on her hands. The weight of the young woman's sacrifice pressed upon her, along with the responsibility it entailed. "She died for a truth she had only just learned," Lena said finally, her voice hollow. "A truth I lived." Adrian placed conscience on the table between them, its ancient blade now bearing the marks of its recent use. "Then we make sure her sacrifice wasn't in vain." In the days that followed, Lena worked tirelessly, recording her story onto data cores, secure, self-contained units that could be duplicated and distributed through Kira's network. She detailed everything: the true history of Balerium, the military tribunal, her 3 centuries of imprisonment, and Kira's sacrifice. "Freedom isn't something granted," she wrote in conclusion. "It's something you must choose every day, sometimes at terrible cost. But the alternative, living under deception, participating in atrocity through silence, is no life at all." Adrian copied the data core thousands of times, and Kira's network, now calling themselves the Broken Chains in honor of Lena's liberation, distributed them throughout the Empire's underground information channels. The Imperial response was swift and severe. The official narrative described the tricentennial disruption as a terrorist attack by Outer Rim extremists. Increased security measures were implemented across all Imperial worlds. Efforts to locate and destroy copies of Lena's testimony became a top priority for Imperial intelligence. But the truth, once released, proved impossible to contain completely. In factories and universities, among veterans and civil servants, the story spread. The symbol of broken chains began appearing as graffiti on walls across the Empire. Underground gatherings to share Lena's testimony became common, despite the risk of Imperial retribution. Lena and Adrian remained in hiding, moving between safe houses provided by the growing resistance network. The Empire placed astronomical bounties on their heads. But for every collaborator tempted by wealth, there were others willing to risk everything to protect them. 6 months after the tricentennial, Lena fell ill. The centuries of imprisonment had taken their toll, and her enhanced physiology was finally reaching its limits. As she weakened, she spent her remaining time refining her testimony and training others to carry on the fight for truth. Before she died, she asked Adrian to take conscience and continue its legacy. "This sword doesn't cut flesh," she told him, echoing her earlier words. "Only deception. Carry it for those who can no longer wield it themselves." Her funeral was secret, attended only by the inner circle of the Broken Chains movement. Her body was cremated, the ashes scattered across the photon drift, where she had first tasted freedom after centuries of confinement. Adrian continued the work they had begun, though he operated more in the shadows than Lena had. He understood that his value to the movement was not as a figurehead, but as a keeper of truth, someone who had witnessed Lena's journey firsthand and could verify her testimony. The Empire endured, but it was changed. The perfect image of continuity had been fractured. Questions that had never before been asked openly began to circulate, even among the imperial elite. Some reforms were implemented, not out of benevolence, but necessity, as the Empress sought to address the undercurrents of discontent before they could erupt into open rebellion. 10 years after the tricentennial, a new curriculum was quietly introduced in the Imperial Officer Academy. It included a course on ethics and choice, emphasizing that officers had not just the right, but the duty to refuse orders that violated human dignity. The course never mentioned Lena Sarayer by name, but her influence was unmistakable in its content. In the Imperial Museum of History, an unofficial edition appeared, a rusted sword, mounted in a simple display case with the inscription, "This sword cuts not flesh, but deception." Museum curators periodically removed it, but it always reappeared, placed by unknown hands. 40 years after the tricentennial, Adrian Corvian retired to a small moon in the Outer Rim, far from imperial attention. He lived simply, working as a repair technician and occasionally training a young apprentice named Zara in the salvage trade. In his modest home, he maintained a small shrine containing a piece of rusted chain, a link he had cut from Lena's restraints on Sintal 9. Beside it was a worn data core containing her complete testimony. "What's the secret of the broken chain?" Zara asked him once, curiosity overcoming her usual respect for his privacy. Adrian considered the question carefully before answering. "It's a reminder that freedom isn't a state of being, but a choice we make every day. That no technology, no empire, no force in the universe is stronger than a conscience that refuses to be chained." He never told her the full story, but as she grew older, Zara began to piece it together from snippets of conversation and the occasional unguarded moment when Adrian spoke of a blue-skinned commander who had chosen conscience over obedience. 100 years after the tricentennial, the Askera Empire still stood, but it had evolved. The dynasty continued, though the name Sina had been abandoned in favor of a more traditional succession. Imperial authority was more decentralized, with Outer Rim worlds granted greater autonomy in recognition of their distinct needs and contributions. In the Academy of Imperial Governance, cadets were taught that no order is legitimate if it violates human dignity, a principle now enshrined in the Imperial Charter itself. Few knew the origin of this maxim, but its truth had taken root in the collective consciousness of the Empire. And on a small moon, far from the political machinations of Acer Prime, an elderly woman named Zara Corvian told her own apprentice the story of a rusted sword named Conscience and the broken chains it had cut. She didn't know all the details. Some had been lost to time, others deliberately obscured, but she understood the essential truth. "Freedom," she told her wide-eyed student, is something you must choose every day. The apprentice listened intently, not fully comprehending the weight of history behind the words, but sensing their importance nonetheless. And so the legacy continued, passed from one generation to the next, like a rusted sword that could cut through any deception, no matter how strong. In the vast expanse of the Iskara Empire, across its 30 star systems and countless worlds, the story of Commander Lena Sarayer and the salvage engineer who freed her became legend, sometimes suppressed, sometimes embraced, but never forgotten. For some, it was a cautionary tale about the dangers of questioning authority. For others, it was an inspiration, a reminder that even one person's choice to stand for truth could echo across centuries. And somewhere, in the depths of space, the derelict hull of Centaur 9 continued its silent orbit around the red dwarf star, its corridors empty, but for the thousands of names carved into a cell wall, a memorial to those who had died unremembered, a testament to a conscience that refused to be broken, even after 300 years in chains.